Hello and welcome to the Dissidents podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke discuss collective anti-Semitism, victimhood, and the wider implications this way of thinking has for society. Hello everybody, thank you, welcome back. Yes, as usual, do all the like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. We would be very much obliged if you'd be so kind. So today we are looking at an article called Collective Victimhood and Social Prejudice, a Post-Holocaust Theory of Anti-Semitism. So again, looking at anti-Semitism and trying to come to terms, really, with why anti-Semitism seems to be so much a thing as it is. It doesn't, for me, instinctively make sense why so many people don't like Jewish people, although evidently they do, and some of the evidence is offered up here. So, Elizabeth, would you care to?
Well, yeah, so the basis really of this article is that the Holocaust becomes the measure of victimhood. So every war, every in the U.S., every political person who starts spewing hatred is compared to Hitler. Every every colonial whatever is compared to Israel, and so the Holocaust becomes sort of the pinnacle of of victimhood. And that's kind of the baseline. I mean, that's kind of the foundation of the article. They're suggesting that that's because that's the comparison point, then it becomes the standard to beat in a creepy kind of way, to meet or beat. So they're talking. First of all, they're in their review of literature, they talk about the sort of the standard view of scapegoating, which we've actually talked about a little bit on here. Right. This idea that coping with the suffering of maybe military defeats, maybe other kinds of internal and international crises is scapegoating. So when society suffers, somebody needs to be to blame. Okay, so we have to avenge someone or we have to blame someone. So the idea then that these authors said that anti-Semitism was particularly resilient, if you will, because it's more than just this scapegoating. So scapegoating alone is not enough. That it does explain some anti-Semitism, but they're suggesting that this collective victimhood. And so by the way, we actually have talked about collective emotions before, this idea that where you have emotions that match or on behalf of your group. So you kind of, take on the, emotions of the group. And we talked a little bit about even sports. You sort of collectively get, and that's going to be relevant actually in this article, because study 2 actually, they took advantage of a sports situation. So so the assumption really has been that scapegoating was one reason, and then that the idea also that, this underlying assumption, collective frustration over something like economic outcomes creates a need to explain the world and assign responsibility for outcomes. And during this process, members of the in-group target an out-group to assign blame. And they're just saying that, that this is not enough. So they actually propose that people are competing for the severity of their in-group's trauma. So again, they're using, the Holocaust as the comparison, and they're sort of competing to be more of a victim as a group than that group, because it is the standard. So they actually say, they use the word keenly. So, I picked up keen from you, since, so I always like it when something shows up like that. It's like, oh, I know where these authors are from. Right. So it says, in such cases, members of the in-group keenly associate with themselves with the attitudes of deservingness, entitlement, and in-group's victimhood which is portrayed as unique, exclusive, and incomparable.
A little bit of a coughing fit there.
I
Under the
know.
allergies too.
I've been hardly coughing all day, and all of a sudden, of course.
All of a
So
sudden.
again, the Holocaust sort of became, they call it the premium historical analogy, or reference point for any episode. So they did 3 studies. So do you want to talk about the background research first?
Before we get into the studies, let's
Yeah.
discuss the Holocaust, right? So when I grew up as a kid in the 1980s and the 1990s, certainly the Holocaust was the kind of gold standard for suffering. It really framed culture as it was then, right? The worst thing you could possibly be was a Nazi.
Yeah, and I think that as kids, like, that just seemed so impossible. I mean, not that we thought it wasn't true, but so impossibly true, I guess, that, because we're reading about this in a book, and it did not compute with the way that we understood the world, I guess.
But
And
I think
that seemed
yeah, I think that was true for your generation. I think that was true for my generation. I think that was true for your parents' generation and my parents' generation. But I'm not sure it's true anymore. I think it might be a bit distant.
well, I mean, that's not what these
No, but
these authors are sort of saying that there is none other in sort of in the textbooks, in our educational system. Now, I think you may be right that even younger, people who aren't on Twitter and people who aren't voting yet maybe are learning that there's, far worse, or certainly other comparable things. But I don't know if most.
Well, so the reason I'm pointing this out is a disturbing trend. I mean, this is not specifically related to anything that the authors argue, but I think it's worth addressing that there are people now who are expressing sympathy with Hitler on the far left.
Yeah.
Which is worrying. And there are people, I would place them within the kind of Islamist side of the far left, but they are quite openly saying that Hitler kind of had the right idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you could have done that when we were kids.
I
mean, there may have been some nutcases who did, but it would have been very hard.
I think I'm not sure that I would attribute it to the same thing that you are. I'm not sure that I wouldn't attribute that in part to just that people can find an audience. There are just a few nutcases here or there, but now those nutcases can connect with one another.
Sure.
And so I don't know. One thing I would, if you're willing, this article is really taking place around the because their population is Greece, right? All 3 studies are done in Greece. And so I was wondering if you know anything. I should have asked you this beforehand, so I'm putting you on the spot. If you know much about the financial crisis in Greece and how, and the sort of the they actually even talk about the like a skirmish. It's not really a war with Turkey. I don't know what you know about that, and if you have any background that.
Not a great
Okay.
deal.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of going back in time to what was happening back then. Certainly, Greece was spending a lot of money that they didn't have, and they were operating under the assumption that they would have been bailed out by the EU, and specifically Germany being the richest country in the EU, and that didn't happen. And so they had to go through austerity, and they, so far as I remember, they elected a very left-wing government and blamed the Germans. But I haven't read up on that recently,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's just like off the
Yeah.
top of my head.
Yeah.
And they're always having skirmishes with the Turks. Like the Greeks and the
Oh, are
Turks
they?
have yeah, no, they're not. So if you think about Istanbul, within living memory, the residents of Istanbul called Istanbul Constantinople.
Yes.
Even though it hadn't been Constantinople since the Ottoman conquest, which was hundreds of years ago. But the feeling is amongst the Greeks is that parts of Turkey are Greek, right? So if you go to, Turkey, if you look at some of the archaeological remains there, a lot of them are kind of Greek or Greco-Roman in origin. I mean, Constantinople was the capital of the Roman Empire. So there is a deep, 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 deep set animosity between the Greeks who feel they are, whether they are or not is another thing. They feel they are the descendants of the Roman Empire, and the Ottoman Turks, who took that from them by force. So there's a real kind of resentment between those two peoples. And a lot
So
of
that's
ancient Greece is in
right.
Turkey,
So that's actually really that's good to know, because I do think that's relevant to the study, in that they're talking about anti-Semitism, and that's sort of that same kind of history that we talked about with regard to Palestinians and Israel, and there is kind of this overlap here, right, in this idea that who's I don't know who took whose monuments and who took whose
Yeah, I
cities,
mean,
and yeah.
it's I mean, for me, I can't identify with any of these issues, so I can't really identify with the Jewish feelings about Judea and Israel and all the Palestinians. Like, I don't feel any link to a specific land. As a Brit
Yeah,
living in Tokyo,
I feel similarly. Wherever I live is home, but yeah.
but there's no kind of sacred bond, right?
Right, right,
Whereas I think with the Greeks and the Turks, they do feel a sacred bond that part of their land is inherently spiritually theirs. And
right,
certainly the Israelis and the Palestinians feel the same.
right,
I don't feel that way about England
right.
or Japan. I just, wherever I am, wherever I lay my head is home. So
Yeah.
there. But I think it's worth unpacking that, because that might be that kind of. Do you know the term blood and soil?
Mm-hmm.
Like this kind of like far right kind of ethno-nationalistic identity thing. I mean, that is a real thing for lots of people. Not me.
Yeah. So these they do talk about sort of the collective um, trauma in Greece. They talk about the great power. They do talk about this, situation with Turkey and stuff, as sort of just laying the groundwork for their, for the way that they designed the study. So, so they did 3 studies. One is a big survey, and they operationalized victimhood. So this is individuals, individuals' experience of collective victimhood, just by agreement with, that the Greeks have suffered more than X, and they put in several different. They put the Jews, the Armenians, others, the Corinthians, they put the Bosnians in. So then they asked, then they asked a question, it should be denied, the Jews should be denied the ability to buy land in Greece. Okay, so they have this, statement, the Jews have suffered more than a list of ethnicities, races, and then it should be denied the ability to, Jews should be denied the ability to buy land in Greece. So this is just a pure correlation. Okay, so it's just a big study. I'm sure there were plenty of other questions on the survey, but these are the 2 that they were looking at. And so they found that anti-Semitism was quite high in Greece, which others have found also. Apparently Greece is a anti-Semitic hotbed, like 69% or something of people express some sort of anti-Semitic beliefs, or endorsed to some extent the anti-Semitism statement. So, but they found a strong positive relationship between that victimhood question, that collective victimhood question, that they had, Greece had suffered more than others, and this question, this idea that Jews should not be allowed to own land in Greece. So they found a strong positive correlation. Now they did find that other some of their other, Armenians, Bosnians, they also found similar sentiment, but it was just the strongest for Jews. Then I love this study. They did sort of a study, I think by accident, but they had they were interviewing people, and they asked some of these collective victimhood questions. They asked some of the anti-Semitism questions, and they started their survey process before the World Cup preliminary. It's getting down to 16 teams. Okay, so I don't know how many teams there are, but so they got Greece for the first time in, they say, I don't know, for the first time in, I don't know how many years, forever, first time in forever. They made the top 6, the Sweet 16. Okay, so they had started their interviews before that, and then they finished their interviews a couple of days after. So a couple days before the World Cup semifinals, and then a couple days after. So they capitalized on this by looking to see if, because of the way that the Greeks won this soccer match, football match, was that they won by a referee decision. Okay, so it was this kind of controversial call, and it went towards Greece. Okay, so you can't really claim victimhood when you were the beneficiary of a kind of close call. That was the researchers' idea. And so sure enough, they found that the people interviewed after the game registered lower levels of collective victimhood. Now, it wasn't a huge effect, but it was significant. So I think it was like, I now I'm right this second, I'm not seeing it, but it was a significant but small effect. Okay. So, pretty interesting. And in this case, the only group for which they found a significant change in trust after the match was for Jews. So being interviewed after the match increased trust in Jews. Okay, so it's like their collective victimhood went down, and their trust in Jews went up. So further support for their hypothesis. And then they did a third study where I'm not going to lie. One of the reasons I picked the article is because of this study, because it's quite similar to the study that I got canceled for. So yes, why would anyone want to do this?
Why would anybody want to study anything significant at all?
Yeah.
As an academic, that's not your job, evidently.
Yeah.
Why would you be interested in anything consequential?
Yeah. So
put me in a room with those people, please. Please put me in a room with those people.
So what they did was they gave people one of four statements. So they randomly assigned them to one of four statements. The control group was considering yourself, to what extent do you agree with what is generally said, that Jews exploit the Holocaust to achieve better treatment in the international arena? So they're basically just asking people to endorse this anti-Semitic statement.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So by presenting that hypothetical statement, does it mean that they agree or disagree with the hypothetical statement that they're presenting?
Funny you ask, but it does not mean that the researchers agree or disagree with that statement.
Who would have thought that?
I know. And as far as I know, none of the participants in the study thought that the researchers agreed with that.
Were the researchers asked to apologize?
They were not. And they got their research published.
And did the university apologize on behalf of the researchers?
They did not, no. I'll tell you.
Who would have thought it? Who would have, as one of my friends says, who would have thunk it?
Who would have thunk it? Exactly. Actually, thunk, that exact phrase was a crossword puzzle answer just the other day. Thunk. They put, who would have blank it, and it was thunk.
Very good.
So yeah. Okay, so then they had a victimhood. So that exact statement, considering yourself, to what extent do you agree with what is generally said, that Jews exploit the Holocaust to achieve better treatment in the international arena, was prefaced then in the experimental groups by a phrase or a combination of phrases. So in the victimhood phrase condition, history has been unfair to Greek people. Okay, that was the victim. So they're enhancing or confirming collective victimhood. And then the exact same statement, considering yourself, to what extent. Then there's a scapegoating condition. Others, and not Greece, are to be blamed for the current economic crisis. Then the rest of the statement. So that's the scapegoating. And then they had the victimhood and scapegoating combined. So people read both statements and then answered the question. So in the victimhood acknowledgement condition, so history has been unfair to Greek people. The respondents were endorsed the statement that Jews exploit the Holocaust to achieve better treatment in the international arena to a greater extent. That was the highest response. The lowest was scapegoating. So giving people the scapegoat, others and not Greece are to be blamed for the current economic crisis. People didn't feel the need to engage in endorse the anti-Semitic statement to the same extent. And then no framing and both framings, sort of in the both, it almost canceled each other out, and the control group. So it was, and it was a significant effect. So it was this, sort of priming up with the experiment, a collective victimhood by reminding people of their victimhood, seemed to, again, this is the author's interpretation, it seemed to maybe prime up this desire to compete. It's like to compete for victimhood. So, those Jews exaggerate. I mean, I'm suffering and the Jews are exaggerating. It's like they're always talking about how much they're suffering when I'm suffering too. You know, my group is also suffering. That's kind of the author's idea, interpretation. So we have 3 studies here suggesting that, you know, people are maybe, their views of collective suffering might might be impacted by a reminder, I guess, to compare their own group victim status with the Holocaust. So this is not to say, again, they found it with a few other groups too. It's not to say that it's unique, but it seemed more extreme with the Holocaust, and maybe a little bit of, you know, sort of, I don't know, get over it already. I don't know. I'm not sure. So I do have a few other things to mention, but what did you think of the results?
So this competitive victimhood thing, this is, you know, this seems to make sense to me. I mean, I've always been at a loss to explain anti-Semitism. I've never. Did you ever notice Jewish people growing up?
No, no, and in fact,
See, I didn't either.
Yeah, it's like, and people say things. I've heard people say things like, "Oh, well, that's a, you know, I don't know, my kid's dating someone named blah blah blah. I presume he's Jewish or whatever." Or when, and I'd be like, "Really? How would you know that?" Like, I didn't grow up thinking about that,
No,
or
neither
you
did
know, I don't
I.
have that. Yeah.
Like it was really weird for me. So it was something that totally ghosted me. So like I remember I went to like I only started thinking about anti-Semitism really in as a serious thing in my 30s. Like before then, if somebody said they were Jewish, it wouldn't register.
Yeah, it's
It would
like
just be like,
they might as well. I'm Catholic, so
I
you
like
know.
cheese.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so it was so from my perspective. So you know, I recently said that like I have very few Jewish friends, and I have no connection to any Jewish community. And then when I started speaking out in favor of Israel, I realized that I actually have more Jewish friends than I realized, but they just hadn't registered as being Jewish.
Right. Yeah.
They might have
This is
told
like,
me, but it didn't
yeah.
register even when they told me. It just wasn't important information, so I didn't remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I was relating that to, I don't, um, the Coleman Hughes, you know, like the colorblind thing, which we may do a podcast on.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. But this idea that, you know, close your eyes and think about what you know about your friend, and, you know, any of your friends, like, was race any part of that? Was religion any part of what you brought up thinking about? You know, like, close your eyes, think about your friend, like, think about what you know, why you're friends with them or whatever. And, you know, race, religion, you know, their height, weight, none of that comes up in the
No,
reason why you're friends with them. Yeah. So yeah, I agree.
but
So
just
what I
as soon
wanted
as
to,
he didn't register, like,
yeah,
and now I realize that they're Jewish, and I could have figured it out, even me, you know, a year ago, just by looking at and thinking about their names, right? That would have been enough for me to figure out that they were likely Jewish. But I couldn't be bothered. It just that
right.
task didn't occur. Like my brain would have been easily capable of doing that, even aged 15. But that
Yeah.
task for you know, from then to now, that task didn't raise itself as something that was even worth considering.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about what brand of tea I might buy in the supermarket was of
So
higher
here's,
priority.
yeah.
But
So here's,
that's weird. But here's what I'm trying to say. It strikes me that is weird.
Well, here's what I was going to
Go on.
say, and so I'm going to play into some people's hands here. So I think that this article, they don't say this, and they did not mean to say this, but I think it could be used to say that people like you and me, because of our white, privileged background, we could flip this, right? And say, well, because we don't have a need to think about our collective victimhood, then we also don't need to think about how Jews are, using their collective victimhood to undermine, I don't know, the banking system or some other international thing. So I'm not saying that that's going on, but it's kind of like, we could use that if we wanted to.
White people do collective victimhood. Oh my
Well,
God.
that's what, yes.
Like,
So
seriously, come to Japan. Come to Japan. Just come and you can stay with me and everything will be lovely. But seriously, like, white people in Japan, when they become an ethnic minority, they are absolutely chomping. This is an American term. I'm chomping at the bit.
yes.
Is that correct?
Do you know? Yeah. Do you know where that comes from?
No.
From the horse. The horse's bit that goes in their mouth.
I
Yeah.
bet you it's
And
one
so
of those
chomping
weird...
at the bit is like, like ready to go. They're frothing, when horses race and stuff there. Yeah.
I bet you that this is something that was originally British and then is like faded out from the British vernacular and is present. Like candy, for example, is originally British, but the Brits don't use it anymore. And soccer for association football,
Right.
was also British, and then we don't use it anymore. Anyway, but they are like Brits and lots of white people in Japan. They're chomping at the bit for collective victimhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they notice when somebody says ohashi jozu, which means you can use chopsticks well. So,
Oh, okay. So, how dare
Elizabeth, if
you?
you're in Japan, how dare you? How dare you other me by suggesting that I can use chopsticks well?
Yeah.
Or when somebody doesn't sit next to them on the train, like, because that's true, right? People often won't sit next to me on the train.
Yeah.
And is that racism?
I think that's partly
Probably.
because...
Do I care? No.
I think it's partly because you're big. Like nobody wants to sit next to a big person. I mean, you're not a big person, but comparison to them, you're a big person. You know what I mean? So nobody wants to like sit. It's like, I'm going to choose somewhere to sit next to somebody who takes up smaller space.
How dare you undermine my victimhood?
Yes.
How dare you undermine the suffering of white people in Japan? I'm appalled. You are protecting and thereby furthering Japanese supremacy. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, maybe it's because I'm big. No, but you see what I mean? So collective victimhood is instinctive.
Yeah.
And I remember doing it. I remember myself doing the same thing, when I experienced racism in Japan. And I did, by the way. I have experienced racism in Japan. And none of it has been consequential.
Right.
Right? None of it has been anything more than mildly irritating.
Well, and you've said many times...
But I have the desire to kind of amplify it.
Yeah, yeah. And you've said one of the things that you realized is that a lot of it is more cliquish than racist. Yeah. Right? It's because they are raised very much in their little cliques that they stay in over the years, and people just don't get, like, you show up when you're 22 or 26 or whatever, and it's like, well, too bad you don't have a clique, you're screwed.
No, that is the big thing. I mean, let's just unpack that briefly because people haven't listened to our past podcasts. It is very difficult to get into an in-group in Japan, and people assume that the reason for that is because of racism, and maybe that might sometimes play a part, but I don't think it plays a part very often. What it is that Japanese in-groups are kind of solidified in elementary school often, right? Or primary school or infant school in the UK would be the equivalent. And they just stay the same. They go through elementary school, junior high school, and then maybe they go off to a different university, and then that's another time where they'll form another in-group. and maybe you can form an in-group in work, but otherwise, even for a Japanese person, trying to enter into a new in-group is husband and wife, so like I'm in my wife's in-group of friends, but it's really, really, really hard. There has to be like a major event in life. So my kids going to school formed a new in-group with the mums. Not the dads, by the way.
Yeah,
The
you've told me
mums
you're not
formed it. You're
you're not
right. Yeah, no.
invited. Yeah.
No. Well, I kind of.
Yeah, but yeah.
It's weird. It's awkward,
You're
right?
not encouraged to
No.
participate. Yeah.
So the mums formed a new in-group. So, there has to be a serious reason to invite people to an in-group. Now, compare that to life in the UK. If I'm going to the pub with a group of friends, let's say, and another friend who does not know those group of friends phones me up and says, Mike, do you want to go to the pub tonight? Like, my answer would be no.
Come on over.
Yeah, exactly right. So my answer would be, I can't go with you to this pub, but because I've already agreed to go to that one with these people, but why don't you come? And it's not awkward, right? But in Japan, you can't do that.
And sometimes when you're out, somebody just ends up joining your group.
Yeah.
You're just out. It's a stranger, but they kind of hit it off with everybody, and you just kind of like there for a while. You're, all in a friend group.
So yeah, like like typically like in a bar in America or the US, you just get talking to various different people, right?
Yeah.
Over the course of a night. Those kinds of bars exist in Japan, like in Tokyo and in the major cities, but they're not the norm. Like most people don't go to them. They go to what's called an izakaya, which is like a restaurant that is more about drinking than it is about food. And they go with their group and they sit at a table that is isolated for other groups, and they don't mingle with other groups. That's the norm. Most Japanese people don't go to what we would call bars. And again, that's not to say that they don't exist, and some Japanese people do go to them, but
they're not minglers by nature.
No, not at all. Yeah. Very, 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 very far from it. So it's very common for Western people to think that the reason that Japanese people don't enter their in-groups is because racism. And no, it's a misunderstanding of the culture. They're just not minglers by nature.
So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, now this is a 2016 Anti-Defamation League survey. Okay, so U.S. Anti-Defamation League survey, 2016. And they're actually comparing 2011, 2013, 2016. So my assumption is there's a 2019. So it looks like they do this every 3 years. I just happened to find the 2016 one with comparison values. So I apologize for not having the most recent. However, what I wanted to talk about was that anti-Semitic, so they talk about, anti-Semitic propensities, they're using that word, not me, among African Americans from 1992 to 2016. So the general population, around 12 to 14% over the years, okay, are willing to express some anti-Semitic views in the Anti-Defamation League survey. And for the African American population, again, that's the term that they're using in this survey. They're not using Black, they're using African American in the survey report, but closer to 30%, so 25% to 29% of Blacks are expressing anti-Semitic, endorsing anti-Semitic statements that are in the Anti-Defamation League survey. Okay. Similarly, U.S. Foreign-born Hispanics, quite high, over 30%, 1 year, 40%. So this foreign-born Hispanics, so people who have, immigrated to the United States. So I guess I was thinking, as I look at this, these are groups that might claim victimhood, right? That might legitimately, legitimately claim some victimhood, and then might be using that perhaps the Holocaust or Jews as a comparison, this might support the study that we just read. That's what I'm suggesting, is that groups that have some, I say claim, I think that, immigrants certainly have their complaints about the way that they're treated, as do, as we know, as do, African Americans or Blacks. So I don't know. I mean, a little bit of suggestion that.
Do immigrants to the
Well, that's
United
not.
States of America or the
Well, but that's not.
UK?
I'm not saying that they do. I'm not saying that they do. I'm saying that they would.
They
They
may
would say
think
that
that
they
they
do.
do.
Yeah, and then there's also it's not in this survey because this is about anti-Semitism, but there's I think we would find, if I looked for a few minutes, we would find that Blacks have more anti-Asian, higher anti-Asian views,
And anti-Semitic too, both.
right.
They have both.
So yeah, I think I just
I say they, but they don't really exist, right? When I talk
no.
about like black people, like is it some
Right,
kind of
I know,
monolithic kind of thing? People who have that pigmentation, I suppose,
Mhm.
if they identify with that pigmentation, which many of them don't.
Oh yeah, there's all kinds of ifs. I mean, again, this is a huge, the Anti-Defamation League survey is a huge number of, so these are only the people who answered all of the survey questions. So about 1,000 people. Okay, so they're not talking about any individual.
Sure.
They're talking about the
but it's
overall.
It's really interesting as a non-European, right? Because I don't know, are you European? You kind of are, like, ancestrally, but have you ever met any Greek people? Do you know any Greek people?
One that I immediately think of offhand. Yes.
So what do you notice about Greek? Because you only got one, right? Like I've had
I got
some
nothing.
close Greek
I
friends.
got nothing. He's just a guy at the gym to me. I don't know.
They're very they're and this is anecdotal. This is not based on any empirical evidence, so flag it, is what I'm saying. But they and I love them. Like, hello, Denai and Joanna, like two of my Greek friends. If you're listening, probably not, but they tend to be very, 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 very identitarian. Right? They're really, 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 really proud of where they come from, and understandably so. Right? They know all about Greek history, its primacy of Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and Leonidas and the Spartans, and they know all about that stuff, right? They will be able to reel off all these facts about how everything originated in ancient Greece, and they're right, much of it did. But they have a very kind of strong sense of who they are.
So the same way that Americans think that history started with the Declaration of Independence.
I would say even more so.
Oh, okay.
And again, this is anecdotal, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the Brits, we don't really have a sense of who we are. Okay. Certainly not in comparison to the Greeks, and certainly not in comparison to the Americans. And so therefore, this kind of, if you don't have a sense of who you are, I have a sense of who I am.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, you mean collective, in this collective kind of sense. Yeah.
And so maybe that's the reason why anti-Semitism just doesn't occur.
Yeah. Oh, I think you mean in you specific, because I think there's plenty of anti-Semitism in.
Oh no. There is. There's plenty of anti-Semitism in the UK too. But the reason why I don't think it occurs to me is because I personally have no sense of who we are as a collective group, the Brits.
Yeah, maybe. So I mean, I think all of us are susceptible
But when
to
you
a
start to,
collective, but
sure, but when you start
yeah.
to increase, when does collectivism start, right? So it seems to be when you would increase the need for collectivism, right? So if the Greeks are under pressure in a financial crisis, then that increases the pressure for them to identify as a we, for them to start some kind of form of collectivism. Similarly, if you put the Jews through a Holocaust, then that kind of binds them together to form a protective group in order to defend other people out, which then predicts the formation of the state of Israel.
Yeah. So
That seems to
I
make
mean,
sense on an instinctive level.
yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, right? You know, an epistemic threat, would prime that up. So,
Right.
yeah. So one of the other than the fact that, their study was similar to mine and they didn't get canceled. I also kind of wanted to, and also of course that it was about anti-Semitism, very relevant right now.
So,
But I also, oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
there was just one question I had. So by discussing anti-Semitism and looking at the potential causes of anti-Semitism, does it follow that they're anti-Semites?
No, it does not.
It doesn't?
No. Isn't
Who would
that,
have thunk it?
I know. I know.
Could it
This
be that they might be actually trying to use that information?
to do
No.
good?
No, no,
No.
no, no, no,
No.
no, no, no.
um so the other reason why I wanted to bring this up because you were telling me that people were posting, like sort of reading Osama bin Laden's letter to America and
Oh, yeah.
sympathizing and that kind of stuff. And I was, I said, oh, I don't really want to like spend a whole podcast talking about, it's stupid people doing stupid stuff. But not that we don't often do that, but I'm wondering. Yes, we do. Yeah.
Other than that.
Well, so, but I did think that this article in some ways was relevant to that. This sort of, I because I've suffered maybe as a pandemic, like, oh, I've suffered, like I'm thinking about like people being canceled, like, during this, like, we the collective we are suffering during this pandemic, and so we need to find, someone, as maybe previous research shown, to scapegoat, or maybe as this one we need to find, as a comparison group, who can we compare ourselves with in terms of the suffering, and is there a rise in anti-Semitism because we collectively suffered through a pandemic, and that was, it's horrible, and how dare, say, the Jews, which is our comparison point, continue to whine about, Israel and Palestine, and this internal difficulty when we suffered through a pandemic. And I think that there might be something to that, and that it, maybe fueled to some extent some cancellations, and some in sort of like, well, like sort of like a parent would say, don't stop your crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Right. Yeah, it's like so stop your whining, and I'll give you something to whine about. And I don't know if people are, I mean, we actually did another podcast on virtuous victimhood. And I think that these two podcasts sort of, dovetail, this sort of virtuosity in victimhood. I think that's some of what's going on here, and maybe some of what's going on when people get on and post about, um, you know, read Osama bin Laden's letter to America. I don't know.
You read it?
No. Not recently. I mean, I have, but not since this whole big hoopla.
It's explicitly disgusting. It's
Yeah.
all about how everything is the fault of the Jews, right? And the reason why, like, he kind of implies that I don't really hate you, America, and it's not you, but because you support the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. Then that's why you deserve everything that's coming to you. It's explicitly disgusting, and yet we are, and this highlights the generational shift, right? We are at a time right now where on the far left, on the trendy TikTok celebrity far left, you can basically say come up with the same kind of stuff that Hitler came up with in the 1930s. I mean, you literally can. What Osama bin Laden says in that letter is eerily close to literally the kind of stuff that Hitler was coming out with. The conspiracy theories about the Jews causing all these problems and so on and so forth. And you can come out with that now. And that's okay. Not only is that okay, it's quite trendy. So there are kids at university who are in the left. Now, hark back to an 18-year-old Elizabeth Spivak or Mike Burke. There's no fucking way you could have come out with that. No. You would have been cancelled in a time where cancel culture wasn't really a thing. You would have been cancelled if you came out with that, right? And rightly so, perhaps. Well, not rightly so. I mean, the ideal way of dealing with that would be to sit down with the person and reason through their bad beliefs and the rest of it, right? But so and I correct myself by saying rightly so. That would be the way that you deal with somebody like that. But you would absolutely have been cancelled for expressing sympathy with Hitler. But now it's okay to say those things.
Yeah.
And
well, and
on the
extreme right, we have a candidate on the extreme right who's using almost the same language as Hitler.
Who's that?
So, Trump.
Oh, yeah.
So in speeches, he's using the same phrases. Wouldn't it be interesting? Wouldn't it be nice?
Jews. But he doesn't hate the Jews. He is the most pro-Israeli president forever, practically. But anyway,
oh yeah, but I'm just saying that the style of rhetoric. That's what I'm talking about. The phrases that are being. So it's not specific.
So not the content, but the way he speaks.
Some of the content too, not anti-Semitic content, but other content. So getting rid of the vermin. He specifically has a whole getting rid of the vermin speech.
Yeah. See, the interesting thing about Trump is that he has a them, right?
It's just a different them. Yeah.
But the interesting thing about Trump is his them is that I have no idea who his them is.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes with the wind. It's whoever, like.
Oh, because he's such an opportunist?
Yes. Yeah.
I should be clear, I despise Trump. But because he's a liar, because he embodies everything that British people hate about America, the whole big, I have the best words, or I have the biggest, or, all of that nonsense.
He's got the biggest and the best of everything.
But when Americans... The critique of Trump should be on the mark, right? When, the thing that I hated most about him is like saying that he goes up and grabs women by the pussy.
Oh, I know.
He actually said that, and he said that in a way that he was proud of it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like boasting about doing sexual assault.
Not kind of like, exactly like, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. So he was boasting about sexual assault. Now, does that mean he did it? No, I have no idea. But if he's boasting about it, he means that he thinks that was a good thing to do. So he's clearly a repugnant individual. And he does have this kind of right-wing outgrouping, the them, the vermin, and the rest of it. But I wouldn't say to his credit, because I despise the man.
That's going too far.
To his not damnation, the them is never explicitly tied to any group, right? It is a kind of like the deep state or
Yeah,
the
it's just
elite,
whoever. I think it's,
or
changes by the week, Right now, because there's a trial in Georgia, it's the
right.
judge, and all
The
that.
judge is part of them. He's
Yeah.
very much like a Julius Caesar, isn't he? Albeit not as competent or intelligent. But Julius Caesar was this. Do you know about the background of Julius Caesar, by the way?
I mean, beyond Shakespeare? No.
So Caesar is in Rome, ancient Rome, you had four classes, right? You had the slaves, which was most people. Then you had the plebeians, the equestrians, like they were the next class up. Now you think equestrian, somebody who likes horses. Well, they tended to ride horses. So. And then at the top you had the patricians, and Caesar was a patrician, but he was a kind of outcast from the patrician. His family, came from a noble family, but they were pretty poorly done by. They weren't doing very well, and so he kind of led a revolt against the patrician class, the system of rulership, right? It's very much like a Trump. Trump is of
Yes.
the American elite, right? But
Yeah.
he's
Kind of
not
doesn't, he just doesn't
for them. He
fit.
doesn't fit with them.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
does fit very much with the American plebeians, just like Julius Caesar did.
Right.
So he's kind of one of those kind of characters. I know. I have to confess, I miss Trump. Like not
Sort
because
of,
go on.
I was going to say sort of the way that comedians do, because it's
Yes,
easy.
yes.
It's
It was so funny.
low hanging fruit. Yeah.
It was so funny to watch his press conferences. You're fake news, and you're very fake news. I just, it was just hilarious. And when he started calling Kim Jong Un Rocket Boy and stuff,
God.
It was awful, but it was hilarious. I mean, I guess it was hilarious in a sense from a British point of view, watching America debase itself.
Yeah, exactly. And so thank God it's not happening here, but of course it kind of is over there now.
No,
So.
no, yeah. I apologize for that, but anyway,
Yeah.
it was funny.
So anyway, I mean, the bottom line here in this article is that perceptions of collective suffering, especially when triggered by comparisons with groups whose victimhood appears to be undisputed, so Jews' undisputed victimhood, triggers hostile attitudes towards the Jews. Our study makes, a contribution to the literature. They're just, really saying that, this, and they make a point similar to what I was just mentioning, which is they say this is not surprising, as the status of victim has as the status of victim has nowadays more concrete and symbolic benefits than in the past. Based on these findings, we should expect this trend will have counter effects, boosting competition between groups and thus leading to higher levels of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the stuff that David Bernstein, our friend, talks about in his book Woke Anti-Semitism, that he just foresaw all of this. That the kind of the victimhood seeking morality would lead to competitive victimhood, and that would result in more anti-Semitism, and it absolutely has. That's absolutely what is going on right now, which is distressing to say the least. So where do we think this is going? Can I make my prediction?
Yeah, nowhere good, I'm sure.
Nowhere good.
Yeah.
So I think that the healthy way of being as an individual is to see yourself as an individual, much in the way that I did, in the sense that anti-Semitism and Jewish people didn't really even occur to me, didn't register. I didn't even think to notice that their names were Jewish. I mean, that is where you want to be as a society. And if you're not there, it's not your fault. It's probably because the pressure around you of people telling you that you have to think in these kind of identitarian terms is making you see the world like that. But where I think this is going is that we are designating a group of victims, which would be, let's say, the Palestinians, or perhaps more broadly the Arabs, because the Palestinians are a mixture of Jordanian and Egyptian, because before 1968, Gaza was controlled by Egypt and the West Bank was Jordan. So, when we think about a Palestinian ethnicity, you tend to think about something that has existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's simply not the case. So we're thinking that the victims are more broadly the Arabs. And that seems to have currency within the elite institutions of the US, hence sort of the stupid demonstrations we're seeing in New York and so on and so forth. So if it becomes in your interests as a member of the American middle class to ally yourself with that victimhood group, that you will accrue social status if you present yourself as being in favor of them, then there will be another major terrorist attack in the United States. And when it happens, those members of the American middle class will come out in favor of the people who perpetrated it. Just in the same way that they are now coming out in favor of Osama bin Laden's letter to America. Right? They're coming out and they're saying that September the 11th was the fault of the United States. Okay, that's not as big as what's going to come, because that's a historic letter that is trending on TikTok, right? It's not a current event that is happening right now. But what it is foreshadowing is what is about to happen, which is a terrorist attack in the United States, and many people, many people at some of America's institutions coming out and saying that it was justified.
We got what we deserved.
Maybe even celebrating it. Not even we got what we deserved. Like them forming a we with the people who did it. Ignorant of the fact that the people who did it would murder them in a heartbeat. But them forming in their own heads a we with the people, them forming their own illusionary in-group with the people who perpetrated it. So I think, and maybe this won't happen. Maybe the FBI will stop it, hopefully, before it does. But it's highly likely that this is going to happen. And I'm not talking about this just from an abstract theoretical point of view. Practical intelligence sources that I talk to say that the US is on really, really high alert. That you have Hezbollah, Hamas kind of people in the United States right now that are getting ready to do this. So we're into really, really interesting territory. And where do we go from there? Right? How do we course correct, knowing that the most prestigious institutions in the United States have chosen, if not to outright ally, then to be ambivalent on the horrors of Hamas, presently in Israel, but shortly afterwards in the United States itself. How do we go back from this? What happens to those institutions?
So are you talking, what kind of institutions are you talking about?
Harvard.
Oh, you're talking about universities.
Yeah, well, the New York Times. I mean, did you see how bad things are right now, right? Where you have the elite institutions of the United States are headed in a direction, if not they are already at that stage, in which they are openly and actively against not just the symbols of America, but the population too. How do you? Well, I don't know we, because it's the West more broadly. I mean, America is just an example. because Britain is exactly the same, by the way. How do we get back from this? I mean, we're headed into weird territory.
Well, yeah, this is beyond my. I guess I don't
It's beyond
see.
anybody. It's beyond
Yeah.
anybody because this is uncharted waters. So
Well, I don't.
your guess is as good as
Yeah.
anyone's.
Yeah. I don't see, and maybe I'm naive. I guess I don't see the extent. Uh, I I don't see the yeah. I don't see all of the institutions as hard over as you're suggesting, and I think that again, I'm sort of against not sort of. I'm against major statements by universities, and I don't feel like it's useful. I don't. I think that coming out against murder is a good idea. I think coming out, but I don't think that I think it set a bad precedent when they did it with the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter, and and they're now just like everybody, just like you and I are expected to, post on Facebook what we think, or get on Twitter and do a little video, about what we think about something. It's like, we don't have a moral, we don't have a value unless it's out there, unless it's in a statement, unless it's on a video. We must not have morals or values. Completely untrue. I don't need to wear my morals and my values on a tattoo on my forehead. I do not need to put it out for posterity, for people to come back to, over and over again I don't think that's, I don't think it's useful. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it gives people opportunities to think about things. You got to come out with that statement, 15 minutes after, something happens. We need, as human beings, to grow and to learn and to change. And in this society, I don't know where those spaces are anymore, because everything's permanent. It's out there forever. I don't know.
There's no room for ambiguity. There is no. You see, this is one of the wonderful thing about teaching Japanese university students. They are perfectly comfortable with saying "wakaranai," which means I don't know. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know about this thing. I don't have the information. I have no opinion of it. When you teach, when I've taught American students in Japanese universities, they know they don't. They think they know everything.
Oh no, but yeah, they think they know. Yeah.
They think they know everything, right? So they can answer any question. Now, obviously, the answer isn't usually very good, but they think it is. They're confident about it, and they will jump to any conclusion. So their minds, you're right. We're at this kind of space in society, this time in society, I should say, where we say absolutely everything with absolute certainty.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know anything about Israel or Palestine, and therefore you cannot ascribe blame to one side or the other because you just don't have an idea, that is not a moral failing. It's not even an intellectual failing. Like, maybe you spent your time learning something else, or maybe, and that could be a video game, by the way, whatever. It's not a, unless it's directly impacting you, it's not a moral failing or an intellectual failing not to know something about something. It's not a moral or intellectual failing to know about it and take a position either. But you're right. We are at this time of absolute certainty, and you're the one that convinced me of this, by the way. Like, I was all for making an ILV institutional statement, and you're the one that talked me down from that, and thank you very much. But it's interesting with other members of our ILV argued the same thing as you, but then weren't consistent with themselves. Love you, James.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway,
so yeah, I mean, it's, you know what, it's a newspaper, a newspaper, I think, they, endorse a candidate or whatever, they never do it in the first, few weeks of a campaign. They wait until, they typically wait. But I expect a newspaper to sometimes say, to include contradictory things. I expect,
mhm.
the New York Times to, to produce articles that say, you know, go, New York Knicks and go New York, whatever another team is, Nets. I'm just, go, and to include both of those. Okay. And to, to have those journalists contradict each other, and I expect there to be that kind of, I don't feel a need for, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or whatever to say this is our stance on Israel and Gaza, and we are never going to publish something that's not in line with that. And I feel the same way about universities. And I feel the same way about myself. I can have an opinion about these things and learn new information, or see something different, see it from a different perspective, see exactly the same information but from a different perspective, and have that alter my opinion, and that opinion can again alter and grow and change and everything. So I don't know.
But that's absolutely vital, right? If you how can you claim to have developed intellectually if you've stayed the same as you were when you were 18, right? You
Right.
can't. You may have invented new ways of justifying your biases, and you may become better at justifying your biases, but you've not really developed. You're just set in stone. And this is like, when I don't know what you were like when you were 18, but when I was 18, I was a radical socialist, like I'm kind of a Marxist, right? An idiot, in other words. And I know a lot of people who are journalists who are exactly like that. They haven't changed intellectually since they're 18, and they think that the grown up and mature thing to be is a Marxist. And I used to respect these people, and I have no respect for them anymore. They're if you can't move past your teenage period intellectually, if you're stuck in intellectual puberty aged 55, then fuck off. I mean, like, why would you be taken seriously? But you're right. We're living in an age of almost unparalleled pressure to conform, and it's not just one side, right? So the woke thing. Anyone who's listening to that will understand that, right? But even on the anti-woke side, we have seen people forming in groups with Christian conservatives, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have Christian conservative friends who I love very much, Krista, for example. But I don't agree with everything that she says or they say, right? So when they think that homosexuality is evil, for example, and let's give them credit, they would say that they don't think homosexuals are evil. They think that homosexuality is evil, and they're not condemning these people because they too have other evils, and even as Christian conservatives. So they're not even necessarily saying that they are any better. But I don't agree with them on these things. I disagree with them quite actively. But what we've seen anti-woke people form in groups with conservative Christians and start to appropriate their beliefs. Hence the whole kind of anti-gay conspiracy theory. And what I have had abuse for, and Helen too, is for failing that purity check. I'm sorry, I'm not going that way, right? I'm not going to start saying that there is a grand conspiracy to turn the kids trans. And if I fail your purity check, well, so what, right? But there is that pressure to conform. So we're in this age of absolutes. And it's scary.
Yeah. And I think to some extent, the conformity is to, the pressure is to engage in any form of absolutism. It's like, just, pick your absolutism and go there. And
run with
that's
it.
what I need to, so sort of this pressure to, I need to know who you are at every moment, I need to know what camp you're in each, whatever. In order for me to interact with you, I need to know exactly what tribe you affiliate with. I cannot possibly interact with somebody, that I don't know what they're, in this issue, in this whatever. I got to know where you stand at all times. And I'm not comfortable most of the time. I have very few absolutes, I think, that are issue related, much more and I
Yeah.
wish I do have other people in my life, but very few like that.
Do you know why? Do you know why you have very few absolutes? Because, Elizabeth, I'm going to do what you did to me.
Okay.
On the vast majority of subjects, fuck all. Like and me too, right? There is only any human being, for any human being in the world out there is only a very narrow set of things that you can know a lot about, right? You, as a professor of psychology, you know about social, like you always tell me, I'm not. You have this kind of insecurity, right? About, I'm not a clinical psychologist, and therefore I can't call myself a psychologist at all. I'm a social psychologist, and you have anxieties about that, right? And that's, I wouldn't agree with you. I think you know a lot about psychology, and you can call yourself a psychologist, and this kind of clinical thing is very American, right? In England, anybody who's written anything on psychology can call themselves a psychologist, pretty much, right? And there's no issue with that, and I don't see a problem with that, actually. Like I did this kind of reverence for psychology as if it was some sort of objective thing is odd to me. But anyway, but you're quite right to feel insecure in that, and I do too. Like I know that I know fuck all about most things, and I'm quite happy with that. That's the way things should be. And that means that as a consequence, my opinion must be malleable.
Right.
And that's
how freeing is that? I mean, to me, it's like, you are free then to read anything,
any
to
discipline,
talk to, it's
change
not,
your mind.
and change your mind. Yeah. And you maybe change your mind more than once in the same day. I mean, what a lovely freeing idea that is. And I don't know, I don't really understand. I'm sure that I felt similarly when I was, say, 18 or whatever,
I did too.
that I was sort of like fully baked as a human. Not that I knew everything about everything, but that I wasn't going to change, as much as most people do, across their lifespan. I thought I was a fully baked human. This is it. I'm who I am. And yet, it isn't just college kids that I see that in.
No,
it's
most people, in my view.
Yeah.
Not in Japan, by the way. In Japan, like, people are really comfortable with just saying I don't know. Like, it's so lovely. But this is what turned me into a philosophical conservative. Like, not like a conservative in the American sense where everything has to be free market, right? A conservative in so far that I cherish elements of the status quo. is that, like, I'm happy to say, like, I don't know that how X caused Y, or even if X caused Y. I have no confidence in that, and therefore I have no pride in my intellect insofar as I think that I'm so smart that I can figure out all of these problems that other people can't. And you know, even if I do think that I'm smarter than other people, it still doesn't follow that their expertise as having been developed in working in a certain area doesn't trump mine. So, you know, I, I developed a sense of humility, and one of my proudest accomplishments was going from someone who was vain and arrogant, because you know they're slightly different things, right? Vain being in love with myself, and arrogant thinking that I had abilities that I didn't have. To being somebody who can change their mind in real time, and that's hard. That's a real skill, right? So you're talking to an Elizabeth Spivak, and she contradicts something that you said and gives you evidence, and you go, that makes sense. You're probably right.
I know.
being able to do that, though,
Yeah.
like I'm so proud of myself for learning that skill. And I wish that fallibility was more of a thing. I wish that people could be proud for being fallible.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, all this, posting of stuff with such certainty and with such finality. And I do think that, I mean, I get it. People are, including yourself, critical of, the institutions that haven't, maybe done things exactly the way that, um, that you think would be best. More about international relations and all of these things, than I do. And I respect that maybe you're right, that these are huge mistakes. I guess it's just a little bit harder for me to see it that way. And I hope you're not right. And I hope that,
So do
I
I.
really do. I really
No,
do.
so do
Yeah.
I.
Yeah.
I mean,
Um,
like I find it very difficult to. The evidence seems to be everywhere that these institutions have gone quite fundamentally awry, and you kind of articulate that yourself, don't you?
oh
I mean, you
yes.
talk about the two conflicting mission statements, right?
Yes,
Like
and
they're.
and I yeah, yeah. Although I think that to some extent the news is both worse and better. So I'll go with the better first, the good news
Mhm.
first. Um, I don't think that I don't think they're all. I think that they're all in more from a more pragmatic, Machiavellian, pragmatic kind of way.
Mhm.
Um, than they are all in a moral and value kind of way. And
Mm.
so to some extent, I think that's worse because, they're engaging in this behavior that's, destructive to individuals and to their own institutions and stuff for reasons that are not, you know, not again not based in some of the morals and values that and traditions and love of learning and knowledge building and that kind of stuff that we would hope that educational institutions would be based in. So I think from that standpoint it's sad and worse than we think, but also in some ways better than we think, because I do think that if something else comes along, they'll jump
They'll
on
seize onto that,
on
right?
that. Yeah. And convince themselves or start institutes, internal institutes, give people, academic appointments and an endowed chair of blah 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 and that kind of stuff. Um, uh, but I don't know how all in a way that you and I kind of
I don't
an internal compass kind of way.
I don't disagree with you, but the extent to which they've gone along with their own Jacobins,
Yeah.
has already and is continuing to cause significant damage.
Oh yeah.
Like I don't think they're going to get their Napoleon. I don't see anybody in I don't see any, because that's what they would need, right? In order for them to, they are not the majority within Harvard, I don't think. I think most academics at Harvard know that this stuff is a problem and don't go along with it, but they're afraid of the firebrands. I don't think they're a majority anywhere, even on the left, but I think that people will just go along with it because they're afraid of these people. So irrespective of them not being a majority, they are a critical mass already.
Mm-hmm.
But they are loathed widely in America and even on the left. So in order for them to win, to create their society, which would be a bloodbath if it happened, I mean, a literal bloodbath. I mean, people would be, summary executions and everything. They need a Napoleon. And I just don't see there being any such figure on that side of things. I do see there being a right-wing kind of demagogue coming along. You've got a number of candidates who could do it. The most obvious is Trump. He hasn't done anything like that yet, but he seems like he could fulfill that kind of role. Especially with all of the lawsuits going after him. And then there's that new chap, what's it, Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever his name is.
Yeah, Ramaswamy. Yeah,
Ramaswamy. Sorry for fucking up the name and someone calling me racist for it. Whatever. Yeah. He's a demagogue. Bright, articulate, charismatic. But a demagogue and a radical. Like, not really a conservative. Trump isn't a conservative either. Ron DeSantis, similarly, by embracing these kind of anti-LGBT conspiracy theories. I see Napoleons on the right. I don't see them on the left. But that said, the left has gone so far that it's ruining people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yours included, potentially. I mean, I wouldn't say it's ruined your life because but the damage it's done to you and me. You more so than me, but even significantly to me is catastrophic. I mean, who would have thought that it would be highly difficult for me to find a job for pointing out things that a 1990s liberal would have said was a matter of course.
Right. Yeah.
A 1990s, a Bill Clinton would have just said, well, of course this is true. And that's where we are right now. Okay. And on that cheery note...
Yay!
Yay! On that cheery note, thank you for listening, and best of luck.